I'm 88 years old, and I've outlived most of the men who once talked over me. That's a strange thing to realize. You spend your whole life thinking you have time to respond, time to correct people, time to say what you meant to say. And then one day you're sitting in a quiet house, and the only voices left are the ones in your own head. I wasn't a weak man. At least, I don't think I was. I worked hard, raised 2 kids, kept a roof over our heads, paid my debts, but I let people disrespect me for most of my life, and I told myself it was the mature thing to do. I used to call it patience, now I call it fear. When I was young, in my 20s, I thought respect was something you earned by staying quiet. My father had been a hard man. He believed in swallowing things. Don't make trouble, he'd say, be the bigger man. So when a supervisor snapped at me in front of the crew, I nodded. When a friend made a joke at my expense that cut a little too deep, I laughed along. It didn't feel good, but I thought that was adulthood. I married at 26. She was bright and quicker with words than I ever was. I loved that about her. In the early years, when we argued, I'd let things slide, just to keep the peace. If she dismissed my opinion, I'd shrug. If she rolled her eyes when I talked about a dream I had, I'd tell myself she was tired. I was always telling myself stories. In my 30s, I started moving up at work, more responsibility, longer hours, a bigger title on the door. With that came sharper elbows, men testing me in meetings, interrupting me, speaking over me like I wasn't finished. I remember once I had an idea for a project, something I'd worked on for weeks. I started explaining it, and halfway through, another man cut in and restated my idea in different words. Everyone nodded at him. I sat there, quiet. I told myself it wasn't worth making a scene. I'd prove myself with results. I always believed results would speak for me, but results don't correct disrespect. They just make people more comfortable using you. The thing about not shutting disrespect down immediately is that it teaches people how to treat you. And once they learn, they rarely unlearn it. I didn't understand that until much later. In my 40s, my son was a teenager. That's when I first saw the pattern clearly, though I didn't have the courage to name it. He started talking to me the way he heard others talk to me. A little dismissive, a little impatient. If I hesitated looking for the right word, he'd jump in and finish my sentence, not kindly, but like I was slow. I remember one night at the dinner table. I was telling a story from work, something that had frustrated me. He smirked and said, "Well, maybe if you'd spoken up sooner." Everyone laughed, even me. But something in my chest went tight. He wasn't wrong, that's what hurt. I had spent decades swallowing small insults, smoothing over sharp tones, pretending things didn't bother me. And in doing that, I had shown my own son that it was acceptable. That was the slow cost. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen in a single blow. It was 1,000 small permissions. 1,000 times I said nothing when I should have said, "Don't speak to me that way." People think disrespect comes as shouting or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it does, but more often it's subtle. It's the raised eyebrow, the joke that lands a little sideways, the meeting where your words disappear until someone else repeats them, the way a loved one sighs when you start talking. I became an expert at pretending I didn't notice. By my 50s, I was tired, successful on paper. Big house, 2 cars, retirement account growing nicely, but inside I felt reduced, like I had slowly agreed to take up less space. My wife and I had grown distant by then, not because of some grand betrayal, just years of small dismissals, hers and mine. I didn't shut down disrespect when it was small, so it grew comfortable. She would correct me in front of friends, finish my thoughts, laugh when I misremembered a detail. I told myself she didn't mean harm. Maybe she didn't, but harm doesn't always come from intent. Sometimes it comes from repetition. The turning point didn't come with shouting. It came with silence. I was 67 when she died. A stroke. Quick. One moment she was complaining about the grocery bill, the next she was gone. Just like that. The house felt cavernous after the funeral. I walked through rooms full of furniture we'd chosen together and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd insisted on anything. The paint colors, the vacations, even the couch I was sitting on. It had all been her preference. I had told myself I was easygoing, but easygoing can turn into invisible. In the weeks after she passed, my son came by often. He was a grown man by then, with kids of his own. He meant well, but I noticed how he spoke to me when we were alone, slow, loud, as if I might not understand. He'd make decisions about my own house without asking. "Dad, you should sell this place. Dad, you don't need that old truck anymore." One afternoon he was in the kitchen, rearranging drawers. I asked him to leave them as they were. He sighed, the same way his mother used to. "Dad," he said, "it's just easier this way." And something in me, something that had been quiet for 50 years, finally stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't pound the table. I just said, steady and plain, "It's my house. Leave the drawers." He stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. It was such a small sentence, but it felt enormous in my mouth. That was the first time I shut down disrespect immediately. No lecture, no explanation. Just a boundary spoken without apology. He didn't argue. He just nodded and stepped back. I went to bed that night shaking, not from anger, from grief. Grief for all the times I hadn't done that. For all the years I'd mistaken silence for strength. If I could tell you 6 smart ways to shut down disrespect immediately, they wouldn't sound clever. They'd sound simple, almost embarrassingly so. The first is noticing it, not excusing it, not smoothing it over in your head, just letting yourself feel the sting and calling it what it is. The second is responding in the moment, not 3 days later in the shower, not in a speech you rehearse but never deliver, in the moment. A calm sentence. "Don't talk to me like that." Or, "Let me finish." Simple words. They feel heavy at first, like lifting something you haven't used in years. The third is not over-explaining. I used to think I needed a whole courtroom argument to justify my feelings. I don't. That comment wasn't necessary. That's enough. The fourth is watching what people do next. The ones who care will adjust. The ones who don't will push harder. That tells you something. The fifth is being willing to let the room go quiet. I was terrified of silence. I'd fill it with laughter or self-deprecation. But silence, when you hold your ground, can be powerful. It forces the other person to sit with what they've said. And the sixth, the hardest one, is accepting that some relationships might thin out when you stop tolerating disrespect. Not explode, just thin. Fewer calls, fewer invitations. That hurts, but so does living bent. I learned these things too late to change most of my life. My wife is gone. I can't go back and tell her, in our 30s, that I needed to be heard. I can't go back to that meeting in 1987 and say I wasn't finished. I can't go back to the dinner table and show my son what self-respect looks like. Time doesn't refund you. Now, at 82, I practice in small ways. At the doctor's office, if someone interrupts me mid-sentence, I say, "I'm still speaking." When a neighbor makes a joke about old men being forgetful, I look him in the eye and say, "Not that forgetful." It's almost comical learning this so late, like buying a raincoat after you've already lived through the storm. But even now, it matters. Because respect isn't about ego. It's about presence. About saying, "I am here. I take up space. My words count." Loneliness in old age has many flavors. There's the loneliness of missing someone, and then there's the loneliness of realizing you were never fully seen. The second one is heavier. I don't blame everyone else anymore. I played my part. I trained people to overlook me by overlooking myself first. That's a hard sentence to say out loud. Sometimes I sit in my armchair in the late afternoon, light coming in low through the window, and I replay moments. The meeting rooms, the dinner table, the quiet car rides where I swallowed what I wanted to say. I don't do it to torture myself. I do it to understand. If I could speak to that young man I once was, I wouldn't scold him. He was trying to keep peace, trying to be liked, trying not to be his father. But I would tell him that peace built on silence isn't peace, it's postponement. Disrespect doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and if you ignore the whisper, it grows comfortable. I can't fix what's gone. My wife's laugh exists only in memory now. My son and I have a better relationship these days, but there are grooves worn into it from years of imbalance. We're kinder to each other, slower. He listens more. So do I. But I still wonder what it would have been like if I had spoken up sooner, not angrily, not cruelly, just clearly. There's a difference between being gentle and being erased. I confuse the two. At this age, you start measuring life not in years ahead, but in years behind. And when I measure mine, I see how many hours were spent shrinking. If you're listening to an old man ramble, maybe that's all this is, rambling. But if any of it sounds familiar, if you've ever laughed at a joke that cut you, or stayed quiet just to avoid tension, I hope you pause the next time. Not to fight, just to stand. You don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to win an argument. Sometimes shutting down disrespect immediately is as small as a steady look and a single sentence. I'm still learning, at 82. And I suppose that's something. If this meant something to you, hold on to it. Not because I said it, but because time moves faster than you think. And one day you may find yourself in a quiet house, wishing you had taken up just a little more space while you could.